rise in the morning sun, I feel you touch me.
Well, it's time, girl, that you should know.
It was one of the most successful songwriting streaks in history. Barry Gibb and his brothers were at the top of the world. Their songs dominated the charts. Their sound defined an era, and the world danced to their rhythm. But behind the glitter of disco lights and the voice that could pierce through any heart, there was a shadow, a lawsuit that claimed Barry Gibb had stolen someone else's song. A little-known songwriter stepped forward, saying the melody that made the Bee Gees' millions was actually his, and he didn't just file a complaint, he asked for $50 million. To this day, no one really knows if that number was ever real. No official court record confirms it, but it captured the imagination of millions who suddenly wondered, had the Bee Gees, the musical geniuses of the 1970s, actually stolen a song? This is the story of the songwriter who sued Barry Gibb, the courtroom battle that could have rewritten pop history, and the haunting question that still lingers nearly 50 years later. Before we begin, if you love stories about the legends behind the music, the heartbreaks behind the headlines, and the untold truths of fame, make sure you're subscribed to RetroWaves, because here, every song has a secret, and every secret tells a story. The year was 1977. Saturday Night Fever had just exploded across the world. The Bee Gees weren't just making music, they were defining a cultural movement. How deep is your love?
How deep is your love? Is your love? How deep is your...
Staying alive.
Staying alive, staying alive.
And Night Fever were everywhere. But in a quiet Chicago suburb, a man named Ronald Selle was listening to that very same hit, and he couldn't believe his ears. He was a former musician, a composer who'd written dozens of original songs. He'd never made it big, but like thousands of others, he'd sent his demos out to publishers, hoping for a break. And when How Deep Is Your Love played on the radio for the first time,
How deep is your love? Is your love? How deep is your love?
Selle froze. Because in his mind, he was hearing his own song, a tune he called Let It End, written 2 years earlier.
We love now, but as soon we'll go.
At first, he thought it was a coincidence. After all, melodies can overlap, and the Bee Gees wrote so much music, it could have been chance. But the more he listened, the more convinced he became. The same chord progressions, the same melodic line in the chorus, even the same emotional build. He was certain Barry Gibb had somehow heard his song and copied it. Now imagine that moment. A man who spent his life chasing recognition suddenly hears his dream on the radio, but with someone else's name on it. For Selle, it wasn't just about money. It was about credit. It was about justice. It was about the haunting idea that one of the world's most successful songwriters might have taken something from him. In 1980, Ronald Selle decided to do the unthinkable. He filed a lawsuit against Barry Gibb, Robin Gibb, and Maurice Gibb, accusing them of plagiarism and copyright infringement. He claimed that How Deep Is Your Love, the gentle ballad that had become an anthem for love across the world, wasn't an original Bee Gees creation at all. He said the melody had been taken from his song Let It End,
All the answers on your own.
which he'd written and copyrighted in 1975. The case that followed would become one of the most fascinating music copyright trials in American history. Because it wasn't just about notes and chords, it was about creativity, ownership, and the line between influence and imitation. And for Barry Gibb, it was personal. He'd spent his life crafting songs from emotion, instinct, and pain. The idea that someone could accuse him of theft cut deep, but for Ronald Selle, it was the fight of a lifetime. He stood alone against one of the biggest bands in the world, armed with a piano, a stack of sheet music, and a belief that his song had been stolen. When the lawsuit became public, the story caught fire. Headlines called it David versus Goliath in the world of pop. Fans debated whether it was possible. Could the Bee Gees have accidentally copied someone's song, or was this another case of coincidence, a melody born from the same musical DNA that flows through us all? As the trial began, both men prepared for battle. On one side, the Bee Gees, backed by an army of lawyers, musicologists, and recording experts. On the other, a man from Chicago, heart-pounding, ready to prove that his voice had been stolen. The jury would have to decide whether the similarities between How Deep Is Your Love and Let It End were just chance, or proof of something darker. And that's where everything got complicated, because when the two songs were played back-to-back in the courtroom, people couldn't help but hear it. The melodies did sound eerily alike, and for a brief, shocking moment, it looked like the Bee Gees might actually lose. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed in. On one side sat Barry Gibb, calm but visibly tense, his trademark confidence replaced by quiet unease. On the other side sat Ronald Selle, clutching his sheet music, his hands trembling slightly. It was a surreal moment. A man who had spent years playing piano in small Chicago bars was now facing one of the most famous musicians in the world. The judge instructed the jury that this was a copyright case, a question of whether the Bee Gees had infringed upon Ronald Selle's original composition, Let It End. For Selle, it was simple. He believed the Bee Gees, intentionally or not, had used his melody to craft How Deep Is Your Love. For the defense, it was absurd. They argued that any similarity was purely coincidental, the natural overlap of popular chord progressions and melodic phrasing. Then, the tapes were played. First came Selle's Let It End. The melody filled the courtroom, soft, sentimental, built around the same romantic emotion that How Deep Is Your Love was known for.
We have loved for about a year, and it's
Then came the Bee Gees' hit. The opening piano chords shimmered through the speakers, followed by Barry's falsetto.
I know your eyes in the morning sun. I feel
When the final note faded, the courtroom was thick with tension. Even those who had come in skeptical could hear the resemblance. A few jurors glanced at each other. The melodies weren't identical, but they were undeniably close. It was enough to raise questions, and in a trial like this, questions could be powerful. Selle's lawyer leaned on that. He told the jury that his client had mailed his demo to several major music publishers 2 years before How Deep Is Your Love was written. He argued that one of those publishers must have forwarded it or shared it, intentionally or by accident, with the Bee Gees or their team. Selle had no proof of direct contact, but he insisted the timing spoke for itself. The defense countered with force. They said the Bee Gees wrote How Deep Is Your Love in France, not America, and had no way of ever hearing Selle's song. They brought in expert musicologists who testified that while both songs shared some similarities, those elements were found in countless pop ballads. A descending melody, a soft emotional chord structure, and a repeating refrain were not unique ideas. They were part of the common musical vocabulary. But Selle's side had their own experts, and they were convincing. They played the two songs side by side, bar for bar, highlighting similar intervals and phrasing. The resemblance was undeniable. When the music overlapped, the melodies seemed to blend into one another. Even some in the press gallery whispered that they could barely tell them apart. The trial quickly became more than a legal dispute. It became a cultural spectacle. Newspapers called it the case of the stolen melody. Television shows debated whether modern songwriting had become a minefield of accidental plagiarism. Fans argued in record stores and radio stations. Some believed Selle was chasing fame. Others thought the Bee Gees might have subconsciously borrowed the tune. For Barry Gibb, it was a nightmare. He had spent his life being accused of many things, selling out to disco, changing his style, even controlling his brother's creative direction, but being called a thief cut deepest. Friends close to him said he became unusually withdrawn during the trial. He refused to talk about it in interviews, choosing silence over defense. To Barry, defending himself against something he knew he hadn't done felt both humiliating and pointless, but the court wasn't ruled by emotion, it was ruled by evidence, and Selle's case rested on one fragile idea, that somehow the Bee Gees had gained access to his song. Without proof of access, even a perfect melodic match could not prove theft under copyright law. The jury, though, wasn't thinking like lawyers, they were thinking like listeners. After hearing the songs, they sided with Selle. The verdict shocked the music world. The Bee Gees were found liable for copyright infringement. For a moment, Ronald Selle was triumphant. The press surrounded him outside the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions. "Do you really think they stole your song? What will you do with the damages?" One outlet even claimed the award could reach $50 million, though no figure had ever been confirmed in court. Selle smiled but stayed cautious. He knew the Bee Gees would appeal, and they did, immediately. Barry Gibb's legal team argued that the verdict was built on emotion, not evidence. They said the jury had been swayed by how similar the songs sounded, without proof that the Bee Gees had ever heard Selle's composition. Their argument was simple. Similarity alone does not mean plagiarism. Countless songs share the same DNA. It's part of what makes pop music work. The appeal would move to a higher court, and this time, the Bee Gees were determined to clear their name. As Barry told one close friend, "We've written hundreds of songs. We don't need to steal one." The appeal began months later, in a courtroom far less glamorous than the headlines that had made it famous. The Bee Gees were determined to clear their names. Barry Gibb walked in with his head high but eyes tired. For him, this was more than a legal matter. It was about protecting the very foundation of his life's work. Their lawyers opened with precision. The first point was clear: there was no proof of access. Ronald Selle had never met the Bee Gees, never worked with their producers, and never shared a label or publisher with them. The only evidence he had was that he had mailed a demo tape to several publishers in the mid-1970s, none of whom were ever directly connected to the Bee Gees or their team. Under copyright law, that mattered. To win, Selle needed to prove not just that the songs sounded alike, but that the Bee Gees could have reasonably heard his song before writing their own. Without that link, his case, no matter how sympathetic, was weak. The defense then turned to the music itself. They called a new set of experts, some of the most respected musicologists in the industry. These experts broke down both compositions into their basic elements: chords, intervals, rhythmic phrasing, and showed how each of those parts could be found in countless other songs. One expert even compared the melodies to several older tunes from the 1950s and 1960s to demonstrate how pop songwriting often relies on shared harmonic progressions. He told the court, "It's like two people painting the same sunset. The colors might look alike, but no one owns the sky." The appellate judges listened carefully. The courtroom was smaller, quieter, but every word carried weight. The judges asked one key question: if the Bee Gees had no chance of hearing Selle's work, could they really have copied it? Selle's side argued that the similarities were so striking that coincidence was nearly impossible. They insisted that creativity had limits, and that how deep is your love crossed them. But the judges weren't convinced. They acknowledged the resemblance, but resemblance alone wasn't enough. In 1983, the appeals court issued its ruling. The original jury verdict was reversed. The judges concluded that while the songs had similarities, there was insufficient evidence of access, meaning there was no proof the Bee Gees had ever encountered Selle's song. The decision was final. The Bee Gees were cleared. For Ronald Selle, it was a crushing blow. He had believed so deeply that his song had been taken, and for a moment the jury had believed it too. But now the law had spoken. There would be no compensation, no acknowledgement, no closure. He faded quietly back into obscurity. For a few years he gave interviews to local papers, still insisting on what he believed was true. He said he wasn't motivated by money, he only wanted recognition. But without legal backing, his voice was drowned out by the machinery of fame. For Barry Gibb, it was both a relief and a reminder. The lawsuit had tested his faith in the very act of creation. For years afterward, he was cautious, almost paranoid about originality. He reportedly kept detailed notes of songwriting sessions, timestamps, and witnesses just to ensure that no one could ever accuse him again. The Bee Gees never spoke publicly about Selle or the case again. In interviews, when asked about plagiarism or lawsuits, Barry would simply say, "We write from emotion, not imitation," and that was that. But behind the scenes, the case left a mark on the industry. Music publishers began tightening their submission rules. Unsolicited demos were returned unopened, often with legal disclaimers stating they wouldn't be listened to. Record companies became wary of even the possibility of accidental access. In that way, Selle's case changed music forever, even though he lost. It reminded the world how fragile creativity could be in a business built on repetition and shared inspiration. To this day, Selle v. Gibb is still studied in law schools as a landmark example of how similarity is not enough to prove theft. And for songwriters, it remains a cautionary tale that the line between coincidence and plagiarism is thinner than anyone wants to admit. Yet even with the verdict overturned, something about the case never quite faded. Perhaps it's because people still love to believe in the idea of injustice, that somewhere out there, an unknown songwriter wrote the melody that made the world fall in love. And for Ronald Selle, that belief might have been his last form of victory, not in court, but in the court of memory. Because while the Bee Gees went on to win awards, sell millions, and define generations, Selle's story became a quiet footnote, a reminder that even giants can be questioned and even nobodies can make the world stop and listen for a moment. But there was something else, something deeply personal that lingered for Barry Gibb after the trial ended. It wasn't just about being accused. It was about trust, about how fame can turn even music, the most human form of art, into a battlefield. When the court's decision came down, Barry Gibb didn't celebrate. There was no press conference, no victory speech, no public statement. The Bee Gees simply moved on, returning to what they knew best, writing music. But behind the scenes, the experience had left its scars. Barry was always the most introspective of the brothers. To him, music wasn't just craft, it was instinct, emotion, and memory. Being accused of stealing that instinct felt like being accused of faking his very soul. Those close to him said that for months after the trial, Barry grew distant during recording sessions. He second-guessed melodies, worried that even a passing resemblance to another song could bring new trouble. The irony was that How Deep Is Your Love, the song at the center of the storm, wasn't even meant to be controversial.
Deepest, darkest hour, you're my savior when I fall.
It was a love song, pure and sincere, written in a moment of calm, before the disco fever truly exploded. It became one of the Bee Gees' most beloved works, covered by countless artists, played at weddings and anniversaries, and featured in movies and shows for decades. And yet for Barry, every time he heard it after the lawsuit, he heard something else beneath the chords. The echo of that courtroom piano, the sound of a stranger's voice claiming it was his. Still, the world had already decided the Bee Gees' legacy was too vast, too undeniable to be defined by one lawsuit. Their songs were woven into the fabric of pop culture, staying alive. To love somebody.
To love somebody, to love somebody.
Tragedy. And words.
Talk in everlasting words and dedicate.
Each melody was distinct, unmistakably theirs. The court had cleared their name, but public curiosity never fully went away. In music forums and documentaries, the story of Ronald Selle still surfaces from time to time. Some listeners swear they can hear the resemblance between Let It End and How Deep Is Your Love. Others think it's pure coincidence, two songwriters following the same emotional compass, arriving at a similar destination. The truth perhaps lies somewhere in between. What's certain is that the case changed how the industry worked. After Selle v. Gibb, publishers and artists alike became cautious. Many began to document their writing process in excruciating detail. Every lyric, every demo, every timestamp, all logged as legal proof. Collaboration became less spontaneous, more careful. Creativity now had paperwork. But for the Bee Gees, it was also a lesson in humility. Fame, they learned, doesn't shield you from doubt, it magnifies it. Every note you write becomes open to interpretation, every lyric a possible target. Barry once said in an interview years later, "When you write a song that connects with millions, someone somewhere will feel like it was theirs too." Maybe that's what makes it beautiful and dangerous. Ronald Selle, meanwhile, faded into the background of music history. His song Let It End never charted.
All the answers on your own.
And his name became known mostly in legal circles rather than the Billboard charts. Yet in a strange way, he did achieve something most unknown songwriters never could. His name became forever linked to one of the greatest songs of all time, and even though he lost in court, he forced the world to ask an uncomfortable question: where does originality end and influence begin? Because no song is truly born in isolation. Every artist, consciously or not, carries echoes of what came before, the songs they loved, the ones they heard on the radio, the ones they sang when they were young. Maybe that's what makes the story of Barry Gibb and Ronald Selle so fascinating even today. It wasn't really about $50 million, or fame, or revenge. It was about what it means to create, about how two people, separated by fame and fortune, could look at the same melody and both believe with absolute certainty that it was theirs. For Barry Gibb, the ordeal strengthened his resolve to protect his music, not just from lawsuits, but from misunderstanding. He and his brothers continued to write, record, and evolve. They survived the disco backlash, reinvented themselves in the 1980s, and lived to see their music rediscovered by a new generation. And for Ronald Selle, the quiet songwriter from Chicago, the echoes of his song never fully disappeared. His story still appears in music law textbooks, discussed by students and professors as a pivotal case in modern copyright. In a way, his melody found its immortality, just not in the way he imagined. Decades later, How Deep Is Your Love remains one of the Bee Gees' most enduring songs, a piece of music that transcended its controversy.
Your eyes in the morning sun, I feel you touch me.
The soft harmonies, the tenderness, the timeless emotion, none of that was ever diminished by a lawsuit. But the story behind it, the claim of theft and the battle over its creation, adds another layer, one that reminds us how fragile genius can be in a world that measures art by ownership. As the years passed, Barry learned to see the case not as a wound, but as a warning. He understood that when your work touches millions, it no longer belongs just to you. Everyone who hears it begins to feel a sense of connection, even ownership, and maybe that's the deepest irony of all. The very thing that made How Deep Is Your Love a masterpiece, its universal emotion, is what made one man believe it was his. The lawsuit faded, but the song lived on. Every time it plays on a quiet night, through headphones or on a turntable, it still carries that haunting question that once filled a courtroom: who truly owns a melody? And maybe in the end, the answer doesn't belong to Barry Gibb, or Ronald Selle, or any court of law. Maybe it belongs to everyone who's ever listened and felt something that words alone could never express, because that's what true music does. It belongs to all of us.